The wind howled through the empty fields, bending the tall green stalks of corn, whispering secrets to anyone who would listen. In the distance, a barn stood proud against the evening sky, a sturdy structure painted red with peeling white trim. It was a home filled with memories, laughter, and the hard work of a lifetime. Inside, rows of golden hay bales lined the walls, a sanctuary for frightened animals, each one waiting for the darkness to pass. But tonight, the air felt different. A tension hung over the land, thick as fog. James, the farmer, leaned against the barn door, staring into the gathering night. He could sense something brewing, something more dangerous than the storms that occasionally swept through his fields. A knot tightened in his stomach. It wasn't mere anxiety, it was an instinct honed after years spent working the land. A rustle at the edge of the woods drew his gaze. Then, like shadows crawling out from under the earth, they emerged. A group of figures, menacing and wild, surged toward the barn, their haggard faces twisted with desperation. They looked out of control, driven by a primal need to seize upon whatever they could find. Looters. It wasn't the first time the world had cracked at the seams, bringing out the worst in people, but this time it felt different, more intense. James's heart raced. He knew the stories, the fights he'd heard about from neighbors in town, how some farmers lost everything in the blink of an eye. His gut told him that he couldn't just stand by. He wouldn't let them take what had been fought for with sweat and tears. He cast his eyes around the barn, scanning for anything he could use: a pitchfork, a shovel, perhaps even a sturdy piece of wood. All of it lay scattered like the remnants of simpler days. The sound of shouting grew louder, breaking the fragile night. The looters had spotted the barn, their shouts blending into a chaotic roar. James felt a pulse of fear, but fear was familiar, even comfortable. It served as motivator. With a quick heart, he grabbed a pitchfork from the wall, its wooden handle smooth from use, and steadied himself. The first looter burst through the barn door. He was lean and scrappy, eyes wide and frenzied. James' breath caught in his throat, and the clash began. With one swift motion, he thrust the pitchfork forward, narrowly missing the man's midsection. The looter stumbled back, stunned but not deterred. "Get him!" he screamed, rallying the others as they poured into the barn like a tide crashing against rocks. Adrenaline surged through James as more figures flooded in. The chaos enveloped him, roaring like an inferno. He saw faces filled with rage, desperation, eyes hungry for more than just food, a hunger that could only be fueled by hopelessness. For a moment, he fought against the tide, every thrust of the pitchfork aimed not to kill, but to protect his home. "Stay back," he shouted, voice strong, cutting through the madness, but they didn't listen. To them, the barn was just wood and hay, just one more place to ransack in their futile search for survival. Ducking low, James swung the pitchfork again. The sharp prong snagged a sleeve, catching a looter off guard. With a twisted smile, James pushed him back, but there was no time to revel in victory. The next wave charged in. Two looters lunged toward him, a wild desperation in their eyes. They moved in tandem, a nightmare unfolding. James felt the sting of terror seep in. The fight was no longer one of defending what he loved. It was about survival, about standing firm against the storm. Whispers of doubt curled into his mind. But then he glanced at the hay bales where his animals hid, frightened and trembling. He thought of the seasons of labor, the sunburnt days in the fields, the frostbit nights tending to his crops, the joy of each harvest. He thought of his grandfather who had built this place with his own hands. He roared, pushing the fear aside like an unruly door. Fuel surged through him as he confronted the two attackers. With deft movements, he jabbed forward once more. The pitchfork found its way, a blur of motion that caught one looter in the thigh. The man cried out, collapsing to the ground, but even then the others pressed on, a force of nature unwilling to relent. The barn became a whirlwind of desperate grappling, the air thick with grunts and the sharpened cries of animals in fright. Struggling to maintain control, James scanned the chaos. The looters were relentless. They thrived in tumult, using sheer numbers against him. He was outnumbered, feeling the crushing weight of defeat alight on his shoulders. What would it take to set this right? In that fleeting moment, he remembered his father again: protect what you love. His resolve solidified. Ripping through the dim light, he fought harder. A swift left swing of the pitchfork sent another looter stumbling back. With each blow, with each deflected grasp, he pulled deeper from the well of courage that lay buried beneath his fear. He was defending more than just a barn. He was defending a life. He had built a life full of sacrifice, joy, and family ties. One of the looters shouted, desperation in his voice as James pressed on. Even as the fighting raged around him, he saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Perhaps they weren't heartless animals after all. Perhaps they were humans driven to madness by a world crumbling at their feet. But that didn't matter, not now. It was him or them. James stepped forward, taking every ounce of energy from his body and pouring it into each defensive maneuver, heart pounding like a drum. But the looters pressed forth still, fueled by hysteria, and the barn that had been a fortress was beginning to feel like a cage. Then, as the chaos swirled, a window of opportunity opened. A fleeting glance outside caught James off guard. The sheriff's lights flickered in the distance, beams breaking through the darkness. Relief washed over him, igniting a spark of hope. But the fight was still on. This skirmish could end in seconds, lives teetering in the balance. With determination anchoring him, James shouted, "Stay back." His voice boomed, echoing through the air with a power that felt almost palpable. For just a heartbeat, the looters hesitated. He pressed on, urgency coursing through him as he lunged again, pushing them back. Adrenaline surged through his veins, and saying a silent prayer, he charged forward, defying the odds. A series of swings sent shockwaves through the group, and one by one, some of the looters began to back away, fear seeping in through the bravado. The tide was turning him against them. And in those final moments when the remaining looters realized they were losing, chaos turned into retreat. Glancing back, they started to vanish into the darkness, the shadows swallowing them, their bravado turning to desperation as they fled from the barn. Panting, heart racing, James stood at the threshold, pitchfork still in hand, the air thick with tension. He took one breath, releasing the pent-up emotion clamoring inside him. Then silence washed over him like a wave, the barn settling into stillness, the echoes of battle fading away. But even as he stood there, breathing hard, he knew this fight was just part of a longer journey. He had defended his land, yes, but the path ahead remained uncertain. An ache settled deep within. He felt the raw edges of despair lying under the skin, the fears and struggles that lingered in the dark even now. The ghost of tension lingered, a reminder of what had just unfolded. But beneath it all, a profound sense of pride rose within him. This barn, this home, was worth every heart-pounding moment of that chaotic night. As he surveyed his domain, he was more determined than ever to keep building, not just for himself, but for every soul who crossed the threshold of that barn. Some looters might have come for his possessions, but what they couldn't take was his spirit and that deep-rooted resolve to protect what he held dear, come hell or high water. Tomorrow, he'd rise again, facing whatever storm approached with unwavering tenacity. Without a doubt, this barn was more than just a building. It was a symbol of hope, survival, and the unbreakable bonds that held souls together against the tempest. And James, he would fight for every piece of it. The moon hung low, shrouded in a blanket of clouds, casting an eerie glow across the fields. Shadows danced around the barn, a seemingly harmless structure in the middle of nowhere. But something was stirring in the night. Inside the barn, James, the farmer, could feel it. A chill raced down his spine, whispering warnings only he seemed to hear. It wasn't the first time he felt the weight of danger lurking just beyond his sight, but tonight felt different. Suddenly, a distant sound pierced the stillness, shouts, raucous and wild, echoing off the nearby hills. The noise grew louder, jagged with intent. Panic seized James as he squinted into the dark, alerting him to the approaching chaos. His heart pounded as the reality sank in. A group of looters like wolves, drawn to prey, was storming toward his barn. As adrenaline kicked in, he rushed to secure the door, instinct driving his movements. He wasn't naive. He had heard the tales of desperation that turned ordinary folks into violent strangers. But this barn, this sanctuary built with his bare hands, held more than just bales of hay and tools. It held memories, his family's legacy, and his entire life's work. He couldn't let them take that away. The lead looter burst through the barn door like a wraith in the night, eyes wide with fervor. He shouted, the hunger in his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Behind him came a wave of bodies, wild and reckless, driven by the same desperation that propelled their leader. James felt a swell of fear claw at his gut, but he pushed it down, grounding himself in the moment. This was it. He could no longer retreat. Not here, not now. With a steadying breath, he grabbed a pitchfork from the wall, the wooden handle warm from the sunlight it had absorbed all day. This tool was more than just a farm implement. It was his defense, his promise to protect what was sacred. As the looters spilled in, chaos erupted. James stood firm. The first looter lunged, wild and unpredictable. With a quick flick of his wrist, James jabbed the pitchfork outward, catching the looter in the shoulder. The man stumbled back, eyes filled with shock. It wasn't just about the physical fight, it was about sending a message. Get out. James shouted, his voice reverberating off the barn's wooden walls. The words rumbled from deep within him, echoing the strength that had been forged over years of toil and sweat. But the looters pressed on, emboldened by numbers. They surged forward, trying to overwhelm him with sheer force. James felt the frantic energy of the barn, the animals uneasy, sensing the urgency, the fear, their soft whimpers mingling with the chaos of the fight. He fought not only to defend his home, but to protect them as well. The second looter came at him from the right, a burly figure swinging a piece of rebar like a club. With quick reflexes, James ducked low, narrowly avoiding the blow. He retaliated with a swift kick, catching the man off balance. A surge of determination coursed through him. He would not falter, but the looters were relentless. More voices joined the fray, chanting commands, drowning out reason. The barn that had been a fortress felt like a sinking ship. Each step back James took felt like a step toward despair. Still, he would not yield. He drove forward, striking with the pitchfork, thrusting it like a spear into the chaos. One looter landed a punch, staggering him back. Stars blinked in his eyes for a moment, but they cleared just in time for him to see another looter reaching for a flickering flashlight that cast eerie shadows around the barn. The glint it offered sent a chill down his spine. This was more than just theft. It was a calculated move to seize everything he held dear. He could feel anger boiling within him, a fire igniting the very air. Desperation fueled the looters. Each face was cast in a shadow of torment, as if they were all capable of empathy but had lost their way in the darkness. James chose to dig deeper. He had to believe there was still humanity left. With resolve that felt almost transcendent, he fought not just for survival, but for a spirit that refused to be broken. He yelled, voice ringing through the barn, bolstering his unwavering stand. His words carried strength. Maybe, just maybe, they would listen. But the fight raged on. A looter lunged for the pitchfork, and they grappled, the struggle becoming a stark dance between desperation and determination. With gritted teeth, James twisted, the pitchfork tearing free and sending the looter sprawling. A surge of success uplifted James, but he had no time to celebrate. Another looter closed in, his face twisted with rage. Sensing the shift in power, and urgency surged within James. He dumped his weight into the next attack, launching the pitchfork, which caught the second man off guard. The crack of wood echoed in the barn, an ominous reminder of the stakes at hand. But just as James thought he was gaining ground, a shout came from behind. Someone had broken in through the back, and a third group of looters was forcing their way through the rear. This onslaught was a test of his spirit, a fight against mounting despair. Could he withstand this tide? Each moment felt like eternity, the frantic energy swirling around him, clashing against the damp silence of the night. Sweat trickled down his brow. A wave of new faces crashed into the barn, and with them came a realization. It was a coordinated attack. A piece of rebar swung dangerously close, grazing his arm. Pain shot through him as he faltered. His breath came out in haggard gasps while the fight raged, and he could feel the creeping shadow of fatigue threatening to drag him down. He had to think, and fast. At that moment, with a flash of inspiration, he turned his gaze to the hay bales lining the far wall. An idea began to form. If he could create a barrier, maybe he could tip the tide, force them to fight on his terms. As the looters crowded in like hornets, he quickly set his plan into motion. With a burst of energy from somewhere deep within, he swung the pitchfork again, shoving it into the ground for stability before he rushed toward the hay bales. He began to push them into a wall, his muscles screaming with effort. The noise of the scuffle echoed, but he didn't look back. Without a conscious thought, time slowed. He could hear the shouting growing louder, felt the hot breath of looters close behind him, but the stakes felt clearer than ever. This wasn't just about the barn, it was about survival, not just his own, but for anyone who ventured into his space and needed protection. With the last push, James heaved the final bale into place just as the first looter reached him, grazing him with a heavy fist that sent him staggering. But he was ready. He grabbed the pitchfork, pointedly staring down the grinning looter. He bellowed, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. As the pitchfork glinted in the dim light, it became more than just a tool, it was a symbol of resilience. James utilized the wall of hay bales, positioning himself, crafting an opportunity. With each encounter, he could feel the tide shifting. The looters began to hesitate, confusion creeping into their ranks as fatigue settled upon them. As they pressed on, he launched himself toward them, firing off renewed energy, striking low and hard. Empowered by a fierce determination, his movements became fluid, a dance of necessity driven by instinct. That's when he saw it, the sheriff's light slicing through the night outside, bright and piercing. Hope slammed into his chest. He wasn't alone. With an inkling of strength, he bellowed, "Help is coming." The looters paused, glancing back toward the door. For a crucial moment, fear rippled through their ranks, shaking their courage. The tide had truly turned. The barrier stood strong behind James, a fortress built from hay and heart. Spurred by the sight of salvation, James stepped forward, his voice a powerful wind against the chaos. "I will protect what's mine." One by one, the looters bolted for the exit, the frenzy of fear bubbling through them like boiling water. They didn't hesitate, they fled into the night, abandoning what they had once fought so fiercely to claim. The air went silent, save for the gentle rustle of fabric and the soft moans of the animals coming to life again. James stood, breathless and exhausted, heart still pumping with the remnants of adrenaline. He took a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle around him like a warm blanket. Shivers coursed through his body in the aftermath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, revealing the raw edges of his emotion. He had defended more than just a barn, he had defended his home, his family legacy, and his very essence. Stepping outside, he squinted into the harsh light of the approaching sheriff's car. Relief washed over him like a tide, pulling away the darkness that had infiltrated the barn. The night air felt lighter now, infused with the sweet scent of possibility. As the sheriff's car pulled up, James looked at the barn that had withstood a storm of chaos. He felt a swell of gratitude for that simple structure of wood and hay transformed into a battleground that had tested his spirit. The sheriff stepped out, a knowing look in his eyes. James nodded, feeling the weight of everything he had fought for. And in that moment, he realized how far he would go to protect what mattered most. The fear, the chaos, it all melted away as a sense of calm enveloped him. He had stood up, heart in hand, against the tumult, and whatever came next, he was ready to face it. because the battle was not merely against looters, it was a fight against despair itself, the courage to stand tall amidst the wreckage of fear and uncertainty. The barn might have stood against the storm this night, but it was the spirit of the man who fought for it that truly prevailed. And that was a victory unseen but felt deeply, an echo that would resonate within him long after the light of dawn broke. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The barn stood solitary against the fading light, its weathered wooden walls telling tales of years gone by hard work, long nights, and unfaltering dedication. But as the day transitioned to night, a storm brewed in the distance, not of rain or wind, but of chaos. James, the farmer, stood by the door, wiping sweat from his brow. He felt a strange unease lingering in the air, feeling that something was not right. His instincts screamed at him. He had learned long ago to trust them. Something was coming. The dogs outside had begun to bark, their growls fierce, sensing the danger that loomed just beyond the tree line. Then, through the rustling leaves, he saw them. Figures moving in the darkness, their steps furtive, shadows weaving through the tall grass. His heart raced as he squinted into the gloom. Looters, a knot twisted in his stomach. In this rural corner of the world, it was a fear he hadn't expected to confront. Suddenly, the shouts pierced the night, sharp as a blade. "Get everything," the leader screamed, his voice dripping with urgency. Fear turned to resolve in James' heart. There would be no surrender tonight. This barn held years of toil, heart, and sacrifice. It was more than just wood and hay. It was a piece of his soul. With steady hands, he pulled the heavy barn door shut, bolting it tight. He grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall, its metal prongs gleaming in the dim light. Each breath he took came deep and measured. He wasn't just defending grain or tools, he was protecting his life's work, the legacy of his family. The first of the looters crashed against the door, a hulking figure who hurled himself against the wood. James stacked hay bales against the door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He shouted, feeling a surge of energy course through him. The door shuddered again, and he felt a wave of desperation wash over him. This was it. The looters would stop at nothing, and he needed to hold his ground. As they shouted in the dark, he could hear the fear in their voices, driven by desperation and madness. They were not just thieves, they were people wanting to survive in an unforgiving world. He looked around the barn. The animals were startled, wide-eyed, and trembling. The pigs squealed in fright, the cows mooed softly, and the chickens clucked nervously within their cacophony of unease. He thought of them and of the lives depending on him. As the crash of the door echoed through the barn, he could almost feel the ground shake beneath him. The barn would not hold forever, and his resolve stiffened. No prisoner of the night, he would face these intruders with every ounce of strength he could muster. Another shudder rattled the door. This time it flew open as a gang of 3 looters spilled inside, their eyes glinting like hungry wolves. James swung the pitchfork, the prongs slicing through the air. He aimed low, catching the first looter in the leg. The man fell to the ground, howling in pain. The leader bellowed, pushing past his injured comrade, face twisted in rage. James sidestepped, feeling the adrenaline surging in his veins. He hadn't trained for this fight, but his years working the land had taught him to be fierce and relentless. As the second looter closed in with a crowbar, James ducked and thrust the pitchfork forward again. It collided with the man's chest, forcing him back. A surge of triumph coursed through James, but he knew he couldn't let that distract him. He shouted, the strength of his voice reverberating off the walls, merging with the shaky breaths of shock that filled the barn. Fear flickered in the eyes of the 2 remaining looters. Perhaps they had underestimated him. He was not just a farmer, he was a protector. James stepped forward, pushing the looters back with every strike, feeling the intensity of the fight rise like a crescendo. Their desperation was a wildfire, but his determination was a mountain. He dove into the fray, his body moving instinctively now, hewing through the chaos. Minutes felt like hours as the struggle swirled in the confined space, each man grappling for control. Then he noted movement from the corner of his eye. A third looter had appeared, creeping in like a snake. James turned just in time, raising the pitchfork defensively. The man chuckled, a harsh, mocking sound, and lunged forward with a knife, the blade glinting menacingly. Time slowed. In that instant, there was a choice to make, fight or run, but James had already made his choice. He would fight for what was his. With a swift motion, he sidestepped, using the pitchfork to catch the looter off balance. The weapon struck towards the chest, but instead of stabbing, he pushed him back, using the force of the rambling chaos to throw him off balance. The man stumbled into a stack of hay bales and fell, the knife clattering to the ground. James' heart raced as he realized the tide was starting to shift. The looters were losing their edge, their fervor slowly giving way to fear. They hadn't expected him to fight back with such vigor. He shouted again, feeling a wave of strength wash over him. He drove the pitchfork into the ground, pointing it like a sword, creating a barrier, both literal and figurative, between himself and the impending threat. But as their resolve faltered, a fearsome roar erupted from outside the barn, a loud rumble of an engine that echoed through the night. The sheriff, relief crashed into him like a wave, but the looters weren't finished. One finally caught onto the shift, pushing through the chaos to reach James. He shouted to the remaining looters, a grimace of desperation carved into his face. But James stood firm, unyielding, eyes blazing with determination. Before he could process the thought, the looter charged and instincts kicked in. James sidestepped once more, the man's momentum carrying him forward. In one fluid movement, he whipped the pitchfork around, aiming for the ground just as the looter crashed into him. The structure underfoot gave way, and they both tumbled into the hay. For a moment, everything was muffled. The world around him faded, lost in sounds of snapping straw and muffled grunts. It was a whirlwind of bodies, tension, and chaos. But as his breath returned, James pushed himself up, instinct guiding him, fury igniting the fire in his heart. The last looter lay crumpled by the pitchfork, and seeing that, the remaining two shared a glance. They hesitated, eyes darting from their fallen comrades to their own survival instincts. In that moment of uncertainty, James seized his chance. He roared one last time. His words ricocheted off the barn walls, growing in weight as they struck home. The looters shuffled back, fear overtaking bravado as they realized the fight was slipping away. With a final, desperate push, they turned, scrambling toward the door. James felt the rush of triumph wash over him, heart racing in time with their retreat. But even as they disappeared into the night, adrenaline coursing through him, he knew the night was far from over. The sheriff's headlights pierced through the darkness like a beacon, illuminating the scene, a solitary man standing tall amid chaos, clutching a pitchfork like a shield. One by one, the sheriff and his deputies flooded into the barn, eyes scanning the scattered straw and looming shadows. They took in the scene, the fallen men and the pitchfork still buried in the ground. "You held your ground," the sheriff said, visibly impressed, walking over to James, who leaned against a wall, panting deeply. "I had to protect what was mine," James replied, voice steady despite the emotion swirling in his chest. A sense of calm began to settle in the barn, the last remnants of chaos shifting away like clouds parting for sunlight. The animals, once distressed, began to quiet, sensing the shift in energy. And for James, this barn, this land, no longer felt like a mere structure. It pulsed with the heartbeat of resilience. As the sheriff and his men gathered the looters, James took a moment to gather himself, reflecting on the storm he had just weathered. He faced the barn, its sturdy walls holding stories of normal days and now an extraordinary night. Each beam, each straw of hay stood as a testament to his battle, the barriers of despair broken apart by courage. His heart still raced, but now he could breathe, the weight of victory pressing down yet lightening his spirit. There would be questions about why the looters came and about the vulnerability of rural life, but for now he had defended his own. Tonight had taught him something vital, that even in the darkness, with fear clawing at the edges, strength lies within every soul willing to stand tall against the chaos. And as dawn began to seep in, coloring the sky with hope, James knew he would continue to fight, not just for this barn, but for the spirit of perseverance that coursed through him and everyone who sought to protect what mattered most. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again, and with it, the promise of a new day, a day to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of fear and tumult, and to continue to forge a legacy of resilience in the face of the storm. And he would be ready, each dawn a new beginning, each moment a testament to the strength that blooms in the most challenging battles. The night was thick with tension, a stillness hanging in the air like the calm before a storm. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow across the fields, illuminating an old barn that stood with quiet dignity. Inside, the soft rustle of hay and the quiet breaths of livestock broke the silence, creating a false sense of security. But that peace was about to shatter. James, the farmer, leaned against the door of the barn, wiping the sweat from his brow. He'd spent the day tending to his crops, but now he felt something sinister lurking just beyond the edge of the cornfield. It was a feeling he couldn't shake. Something deep in his gut told him not all was right. As the last of the daylight faded, he strained to hear beyond the familiar sounds of the countryside. Then the faint echoes of raised voices cut through the tranquility. Words were harsh, punctuated by harsh laughter. Panic surged through him. James had heard stories of looters, people desperate enough to take from others in their time of need. He glanced toward the shadows gathering at the edges of the fields, and suddenly the whispers turned into snarls. One voice roared, sending a chill down his spine. In that instant, adrenaline flooded his system. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a man defending what mattered most, a sanctuary built from years of labor and love. As the first figure became visible, charging toward the barn, James felt a weight settle on his chest. This wasn't just a barn, it was his home, his family's legacy. He took a deep breath, gathering courage as the sound of footsteps grew heavier, multiplied by the shadows of more men creeping toward the entrance. James shouted, his voice deeper than he felt. He rushed to secure the barn door, a heavy wooden barrier that had weathered storms but now stood in peril. He grabbed a pitchfork, its metal prongs still gleaming from the last time he'd used them in the fields. It wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon, the embodiment of his resolve. The first looter burst through the door, a masked man with eyes wide and wild. He snarled, pushing James aside like he was nothing, but James wasn't done fighting. With a swift motion, he jabbed the pitchfork forward, catching the intruder in the side. The man stumbled back, surprised, a grunt escaping his lips. "Get him," shouted someone from outside. Desperation encased their voices, but James felt an inner fire ignite. He wasn't going to let them take what he had fought so hard to protect. The barn erupted into a whirlwind of chaos, looters pouring in like a flood. The heavy scent of animal feed mixed with the acrid odor of sweat and fear. James swung the pitchfork again and again, deflecting attacks, pushing back each looter with determination. He could see their faces, haggard and desperate, eyes wide, not the mindless thieves he had expected. Each one was a reflection of fear, driven by the harsh realities of life. James ducked low as a second attacker lunged at him with something heavy, a crowbar perhaps. He felt the rush of air as it swooped over his head, narrowly missing him. He countered by spinning on his heel, the barn's familiar surroundings blurring around him as he thrust the pitchfork outward, catching the looter in the thigh. The man fell, howling in pain, but the others kept pressing in. He couldn't let them overwhelm him. The idea of losing everything, his cattle, his crops, the barn filled with memories, was too much to bear. He shouted, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is my land." The sheer fierceness of his words caught them off guard. For a heartbeat, their aggression faltered, and he seized his opportunity. With one hard shove, he sent two of them crashing into a pile of hay bales. The noise echoed like thunder, the shockwave rippling through the fray, creating a brief moment of confusion. In that pause, fear flickered in their eyes. These weren't seasoned criminals, they were desperate men without a foothold. He saw it in their eyes, the same flicker of helplessness he felt when he faced storms that threatened his crops. Every man had a part of them that craved survival, but he couldn't let that pull him under. James bellowed again, his pitchfork held high, a beacon of defiance. The looters shifted uneasily, glancing between one another. "You won't find anything of value here, just hard work and heart." Just then, another looter made a move from behind, catching James by surprise. The man lunged for the pitchfork, intent on bringing it down. Quick as lightning, James twisted, using the handle to deflect the blow. He acted on instinct, embodying the fiercely protective nature that had been part of him since childhood. The fight continued, a desperate dance between the two. The barn filled with the sounds of struggle, men grunting against each other, the pitchfork slashing through the air. Each clash felt like a battle cry, a fight not just for possessions, but for dignity and identity. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but James pushed through the fatigue. Every strike against the looters was also a defense of the land he loved. He remembered the stories his father used to tell, tales of resilience, standing tall against adversity, and that mantra ignited a fierce pride within him. It wasn't just about muscles or tools, it was about spirit. One of the looters shouted, panic emerging amidst the chaos. Hearing their fear echoed his own. They were humans driven by desperation, but that didn't give them the right to take what was his. He shouted, scrambling back toward the door. Refusing to back down, James pressed forward, casting away doubt and fear. The last of the looters faltered, glancing nervously at the now diminished group. The tide was shifting once more. With one final surge of energy, he drove the pitchfork toward the floor again, the sound resonating like an alarm, a declaration. "You want to take from me?" James roared, and for a fleeting moment he could see fear ripple through the group. That realization, he had turned the battle from a defense into an offense. The remaining looters, their confidence shaken and their numbers dwindling, exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. One by one, they withdrew, overwhelmed by the unwavering spirit standing before them. Panic took hold as they scrambled toward the exit, jolting against each other as they fled the barn. Suddenly, the barn door burst open and the sheriff's car flooded the scene with light. The sheriff stood at the entrance, his silhouette backlit but the badge shining bright. "James," he called out, his tone laced with urgency. With the looters rushing past him, James felt a rush of relief. "I'm fine," he gasped, still gripping the pitchfork tightly as if expecting another attack. The sheriff commanded, rushing after the retreating looters as his deputies followed suit. James watched them disappear into the night, shadows fading under the bright lights, the barn slowly settling back into its familiar quiet. The adrenaline slowly began to ebb away from his body, replaced by the weight of reality crashing down. He had fought and won, but the emotional toll lingered like a thick blanket. He leaned against the pitchfork still, feeling its weight in his hands, a reminder of the battle. "Let's take a look around," the sheriff said, stepping into the barn, scanning the visibly distraught scene. The chaos had left remnants hay scattered across the floor, injured animals stirred uneasily, and the distinct smell of fear hung thick in the air. The sheriff's tone softened as he approached. James nodded, but it was more than physical strength that was needed. They came for desperation, but they didn't find what they expected. The sheriff glanced around, seeing the remnants of the struggle, before meeting James' eyes with newfound respect. "You did well, not many would face down that kind of threat." James felt a warmth rise within him, a mix of pride and relief. He had defended his fight not just for his possessions, but for the roots that ran deep in the soil of that barn. It was a fight for love for his land, his animals, and the spirit of resilience that lay within. Together, they began to assess the damage, tending to the shaken animals, soothing them as they calmed beneath the soft cadence of gentle voices. The barn may have become a battlefield, but now it was returning to its true form, a place of refuge, of labor and growth. As dawn began to break, soft rays of sunlight seeped through the cracks in the walls, bathing the barn in golden light. James sighed, taking a moment to breathe in the fresh air, feeling a sense of peace settling around him once more. "This barn is more than just walls and hay," he said, turning to the sheriff. "It's the heart of everything I've built." The sheriff nodded, a supportive glint in his eyes. "And you won't have to." As they wrapped up the assessment of the barn, James felt a sense of purpose ignite within him. This wasn't just a story of a battle won. It was about resilience, about standing tall in the face of adversity. He had fought with everything within him, and he would continue to do so every single day. There would always be challenges ahead, but he wouldn't shy away. He would rise with the sun, ready to face whatever came next, with a heart full of courage and unwavering resolve. With every dawn, he would cherish the barn, the land, and what it represented. A life forged from his own hands, defended with an indomitable spirit. His life was not just about survival, it was about thriving, about holding fast against the storm and finding the strength to fight for everything that mattered. And as he looked around at the barn, bathed in morning light, he knew he would never stop defending it, because it was home, and home was worth the fight. The stillness of the countryside was broken by a low rumble in the distance, a sound that echoed across the fields like thunder before a storm. James the farmer stood at the edge of his property, squinting into the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He felt an unusual tension in the air, a chill that crept down his back. With the crops harvested and the barn filled, he was ready for winter. But something was brewing out there, and it felt wrong. A sudden crash shattered the quiet, and he spun around, instincts kicking in. The barn door, his sturdy wooden fortress, had been flung open. His heart raced as he watched figures spill inside uninvited guests with wild, desperate eyes, their intentions clear as day. Looters. James had heard the stories, farmers who had lost everything in a single night. In that split second, he made a choice. He would not let this be his story. The barn was not just a shelter for his animals. It was a representation of his life's work, a stronghold built on sweat and determination. He felt the weight of generations on his shoulders. As the first looter lunged forward, a gleam of metal catching the fading light, James snatched the pitchfork leaning against the barn wall. Its wooden handle felt warm and familiar in his grip, and with a swift, practiced motion, he thrust it forward, catching the man square in the chest. The looter gasped, stumbling back, and for a brief moment, shock overshadowed the chaos. James shouted, his voice breaking the air like a thunderclap. But more looters flooded in, pushing against each other, driven by desperation and a hunger that went far beyond food. They were unyielding, eyes filled with a wildness that rattled James to his core. The barn transformed, suddenly a battleground, and he could hear the frantic bleating of sheep and the uneasy mooing of cows swelling around him. With each swing of the pitchfork, he fought against them, thrusting and deflecting, trying to carve out a space where he could breathe. One looter charged at him with a crowbar, the rusted metal aimed at his head. James ducked just in time, the heavy air rushing past him as he dodged. The energy surged through him, quickening his heart rate. Another looter grabbed a handful of hay and flung it at him, the dry strands clinging to his skin like a swarm of angry bees. James clenched his jaw, pushing through the distraction. He could feel the primal urge to protect everything that lay inside these walls. Each strike was not just to fend them off, it was also his declaration of defiance. "Come on," someone shouted from the back, their voice tinged with panic and aggression. James cast a glance behind him at the precious livestock nestled in the corners. The last bastions of a life lived on the land, and any sense of fear was abolished. He charged forward, spirit aflame. Thrusting the pitchfork again, he caught the next looter off guard, the steel prongs grazing his arm. The man yelped in pain, backing away just enough for James to gain footing. He roared out, "Leave now." The sound echoed in the barn, shaking the air, resonating with the depth of his determination. But more kept coming, a tide of bodies that pressed in like a storm. James felt overwhelmed, but something within him would not falter. Stories of his father flashed through his mind, of standing tall against storms, of never backing down. The fight was not just his, it was for every farmer who had ever faced despair, every soul who had poured their life into the land. Suddenly, out of the fray, a looter snuck in behind him. James sensed the movement, adrenaline kicking in. With a quick spin, he pivoted, raising the pitchfork, and narrowly missed a blow meant for him. It was a crude knife, glinting dangerously in the low light. He pushed back, feeling the weight of survival settle in his chest. These men pretending to be tough were really trapped in a world that offered them nothing. Just as he was about to make another thrust with the pitchfork, the knife-wielding man lunged again, this time succeeding in catching the edge of James's arm. Pain shot through him, but it only fueled his resolve. He had to protect what mattered most. He bellowed, pushing fiercely against his attacker, dropping his pitchfork and tackling the man to the ground. They rolled in a flurry of limbs, dust swirling around them as they grappled. In that moment of raw intensity, James remembered the feel of dirt beneath his hands as a boy planting seeds, nurturing life. This barn was the culmination of all those dreams. With a furious determination, he punched the looter square in the jaw, sending him reeling backward. The looter gasped as James pushed himself back up to his feet, scanning to see how the others fared. Some had retreated, eyes wide with fear, realizing they had underestimated who they were up against. Yet there were still others pressing forward, driven by greed and desperation. It was then that James made a decision. He would not only defend, he would fight with the spirit of 100 farmers who had come before him, each a testament to resilience. He shouted again, his voice almost primal, echoing off the barn walls. The sound rang clear, ripe with fierce energy. For a fleeting moment, confusion crossed the faces of the looters. He jabbed the pitchfork toward them, tension rippling through the air like electricity. It was a challenge shaped by all the years he'd fought and bled for this land. The remaining looters hesitated, sharp breaths leaving their lungs. Seeing them falter, James charged, a whirlwind of determination. He ducked low, swinging the pitchfork again in one swift, practiced motion, sending another looter staggering back into a haystack. As the chaos unfolded, one looter pulled away, clearly unwilling to face the lone figure standing within the barn. He pushed his way through the others, panic etched on his features. He yelled, scrambling for the exit just as the sheriff's lights pierced through the darkness outside, illuminating their escape path. One of the remaining looters screamed, but it was already too late. The tide had turned. The strength that surged through James felt almost supernatural, and for the first time he caught a glimpse of hope. They were backing down, a primal fear drawing them away. "Leave," he shouted, his voice thick as iron. Finally, he saw them turn tail, the looters fleeing the way they came, fear overtaking their greed. With every heavy breath, James felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He steadied himself against the wall of the barn, the world around him slowly settling. But he knew the struggle wasn't over yet. The sheriff and his deputies would be there any moment, but he needed to assess the damage. As reality crashed back in, he looked around. The barn was a mess, hay scattered, animals uneasy. Everywhere he turned, the remnants of the struggle made the walls feel smaller, but amidst that chaos, there was a deeper sense of peace, a resolution forming. The sheriff arrived moments later, rushing through the barn door, quickly assessing what had just transpired. The man's eyes widened as he took in the scene, the panting farmer standing defiantly amidst the remnants of the fight. "James," he called, urgency in his voice. James breathed heavily, still gripping the pitchfork, the metal now dulling in the light. The sheriff moved to inspect the looters who had remained outside, trying to get a grasp on what had happened. "This town is getting more reckless by the day. I'm sorry you had to face that," he replied, turning back toward James with a newfound respect. "I couldn't let them," James said, the fire inside him still flickering. The sheriff nodded, a solemn understanding settling between them. "We'll get those men arrested, I promise you that," he said, glancing at the remnants left in the barn. "But you need to know one thing, you stood your ground when it mattered most." James felt the weight of those words. The reality of what he had endured began to seep in. He had fought, really fought, not just for himself, but for all who cherished their homes, their land. With the chaos starting to retreat, he turned his attention to the animals whose frightened faces peeked from their stalls. The moment they locked eyes, a wave of gratitude coursed through him. They had weathered the storm, and he would ensure that they would be safe moving forward. The sheriff helped him gather himself, providing comfort amidst the wreckage. Together, they began assessing the damage, ensuring that every animal was accounted for. As the sun began to rise, the first light of dawn creeping through the barn windows, hope flickered anew. James chuckled softly, but the gravity of the night weighed heavy in his heart. "But to me, it's so much more. It's my family's heritage. It's their sweat and tears that built it." "Then keep fighting," the sheriff replied, giving him a firm nod. As the morning light washed over the barn, illuminating the bruises and the wear of the battle, James felt lighter. Fight was far from over, but he had emerged victorious. Every challenge he faced would only strengthen him. Together with the sheriff, they set a plan into motion, a determination to reestablish peace within the community. They would rally, share stories like his, and inspire others to stand up for what was right. Although looters might try again, James felt a surge of confidence. He would stand firm, a sentinel for not just his barn, but for the heart of every small community that had tasted turmoil. From that night on, he knew resilience would flow through the soil of his land, strong as the roots of the crops he nurtured. Every day brought with it the promise of new challenges, but armed with his pitchfork and an iron will, James was ready to embrace the fight. As dawn broke, illuminating the barn around him, he resolved that no matter the storms ahead, he would always defend not just his home, but the very essence of who he was and what his land represented. The night seemed deceptively calm, but the chill in the air carried an undercurrent of tension. In the distance, a storm was brewing, not one of rain and thunder, but of chaos and desperation. James, the farmer, had always been attuned to the rhythms of the land, and tonight something felt off. He felt it deep in his bones as he tightened the last of the bales of hay inside the barn. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver light through the barn's wooden slats. Inside, the animals shifted uneasily. James felt their anxiety resonate with his own. He glanced out the barn's entrance, scanning the vast fields stretching before him. Shadows flickered at the edges, and in an instant, the sense of unease turned to dread. Suddenly, a shout shattered the tranquility, echoing off the barn walls like a relentless drum. "Get everything." The voice was harsh, filled with urgency, and James froze, realizing the terrifying reality. Looters were coming. His heart raced. This wasn't just any barn, it held the essence of his life, the crops harvested in countless hours of grueling work, the animals he cared for day in and day out, and the memories of family gathered and laughing under its roof. He couldn't let them take it. With a quick, determined motion, he locked the barn door, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He grabbed the pitchfork resting against the wall, its prongs gleaming menacingly in the dim light. This was his home, and he was prepared to defend it. The door rattled, and with a deafening crash, it burst open. A group of men thundered inside, wild-eyed and frenzied, their eager hands reaching for anything they could grab. James's heart pounded like a war drum as he faced them, the air thick with the scent of fear and sweat. He shouted, summoning all his strength. The first looter lunged at him, wielding a steel rod with intentions all too clear. James sidestepped just in time, feeling the rush of air as the makeshift weapon swung past him. With a quickness that surprised even himself, he jabbed the pitchfork forward, catching the looter in the side. The man howled, stumbling back, eyes wide in shock. James had struck first. Adrenaline surged through him, sharp as the cold night air. Every fiber in his being screamed to fight, to protect the heart of his life. But more were coming. As one man staggered back, two others charged forward, their desperation palpable. James swung the pitchfork again, the weight of his ancestors behind him, every lesson instilled in him since childhood flashing in his mind. This was not just a fight, it was a testament to every struggle his family had faced. He yelled, pushing the words like a chant, an incantation meant to fortify his spirit. The looters hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces, but then a chorus of orders rang out, "Get him." And with that, they pressed in, a wall of reckless energy trying to overwhelm his resolve. James took a deep breath, remembering the countless seasons he had worked the farm rain, sun, and storms, but he wouldn't back down now. As they surged forward, he met them head-on, the pitchfork feeling like an extension of his own will. He ducked as another looter swung a crowbar, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The world around him slowed, every sound magnified, the cheers of his livestock, the thud of heavy boots on the dirt floor, and the frantic shouts from the other looters. He thrust the pitchfork again, catching another man in the thigh, and the cry of pain that followed ignited a fire within him. But he was still outnumbered. For every man he pushed back, two more took their place, and he could feel the tide turning against him. With every passing moment, fatigue began to creep in, but each glance at the scared animals in their stalls filled him with renewed vigor. They depended on him. In a whirlwind of chaos, he recalled the stories his father told, stories of defending what was right and standing tall against adversity. He took a breath and steadied himself, anchoring to those memories as the world around him morphed into a blur of movement and sound. As a third looter lunged at him, James felt an instinctive surge of anger mixed with fear. He sidestepped just in time, and with a guttural shout, he pushed back, using the momentum to throw the intruder into a stack of feed bags. The sound of the collision echoed loudly, reverberating off the walls of the barn. He roared again, his voice filled with righteous fury. The remaining looters hesitated, glancing back at the door, their bravado faltering. This wasn't just a simple theft, they were facing a man who refused to surrender. Just as he thought the tide was turning, the first looter he had injured recovered his ground and charged at James with renewed fury. This time the man wielded a broken bottle, jagged and dangerous. James felt the familiar rush of adrenaline pump through his body as instinct took over. As the man lunged, James ducked low, feeling the glass whistling past him. Quickly, he grabbed a nearby shovel leaning against the wall. He swung it with all his might, striking the man's wrist. The bottle fell, shattering on the ground, and the looter howled, clutching his arm, the fight leaving his eyes. Just then, the remaining looters began to retreat, fear and panic etched on their faces. The realization hit them they were losing. James stepped forward, fueled by an energy he never knew he had, his pitchfork held high. He commanded fiercely. Fumbling back, the looters turned as one, scrambling for the exit, abandoning their plans like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The sound of their heartbeat echoed in the barn, blending with the terrified cries of the animals and the heavy breathing of James. As they fled, he felt an unfamiliar sensation wash over him, a mix of victory and vulnerability. The barn lay in disarray, hay scattered everywhere, the animals skittish yet slowly calming. The echoes of the struggle faded, but he remained tense, ready for another attack even though he knew the danger had passed. But just then, the barn door opened again. The sheriff arrived with his deputies, bright beams of light slicing through the darkness like a beacon. Relief flooded over James, but he could hardly move, adrenaline still coursing through him. The sheriff called, eyes darting around the mess. "We heard the commotion." "I'm fine," he managed to say, feeling suddenly weary and raw. "They tried to take everything." The sheriff studied the scene, taking in the defeated looters, some sprawled against hay bales, others running off into the night. "I'm proud of you for standing your ground," he said, moving closer, looking straight into James's eyes. With those words, something inside James shifted. He hadn't just defended a barn that night, he had defended his legacy, the hard work, the dreams, and the sweat of every individual who had fought to keep their lives intact. A swell of pride surged within him, intertwining with the weariness still hanging on him. As the sheriff took stock, James bent down, breathless, gathering himself. He looked around the barn. Echoes of turmoil still lingered, but were fading into a hum like the calming of the earth after a storm. The sun would rise soon, bringing a new day, and he would need to overcome the remnants of the night. "I won't let fear take this from me again," he declared quietly, more to himself than anyone. "This land is my life, my heart." The sheriff nodded, a knowing smile on his face. "We'll work to keep your land safe. You face danger here, and that kind of bravery doesn't go unnoticed." Just then, the sheriff turned to his deputies, barking orders to begin the paperwork and help with the aftermath. Meanwhile, James knelt by the animals, stroking their fur and whispering soft words, vowing to protect them from whatever lay ahead. There would be cleanup and there would be scars left behind from the attack, but in that moment, as dawn began to push through the cracks of the barn, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wouldn't let a band of thieves define his narrative. Facing the sunrise, he inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. There was strength in every heartbeat, a fire ignited within him that refused to extinguish. This land would test him again, but he was ready for the challenge. He stood tall, pitchfork at the ready, prepared for whatever battles lay ahead, knowing that sometimes the real victory was in standing firm against the storm. And as silver light poured into the barn, illuminating what had once felt like a dark night of doom, James realized he was not alone. He belonged to a community of brave hearts, all working to keep their dreams alive. The barn wasn't just a structure, it was alive with memories, brimming with stories. And it would endure just as he would, ready for whatever came next. He would fight, he would stand, and he would protect what mattered with all his might. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and he intended to write it with the ink of resilience and courage. The wind howled through the fields, teasing the tall grass and sending shivers down James's spine. As he stood at the barn door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was an eerie sensation, one he had come to trust over the years. The night was dark, but the moonlight flickered cautiously through the clouds, lighting the way for shadows that danced across the land. Suddenly, the stillness broke. A distant shout sliced through the quiet, sending a bolt of adrenaline through him. "Hurry up!" The words were harsh and filled with a frantic urgency. Panic surged in James's chest. Looters. They existed only in whispered rumors here, but now they were real and closing in fast. His heart raced as he turned to the barn, scanning the open doorway. Inside, the familiar scent of hay and earth lingered, a comfort he had grown up with, but now it felt like a fragile shield against the impending chaos. He grabbed a pitchfork from the wall and steadied his breath. This barn held more than just objects. It held his family's legacy, years of labor, and a bond with the land he loved. There was no way he'd let anyone take that away. The barn door creaked as the first looter stumbled in, a figure cloaked in darkness, eyes wild with desperation. He shouted. The words twisted the knife of fear deeper into James's gut. Before the man could take another step, James lunged forward, thrusting the pitchfork into the air. It caught the looter in the shoulder, sending him crashing against the wall, the shock freezing him momentarily. James screamed, his voice echoing around the barn like a thunderclap. It was more than a plea, it was a rallying cry, a fierce statement of defiance. But then, like a flood, more looters poured in, their eyes filled with greed and panic. James's heart raced as he saw the group surge toward him, a chaotic wave of desperation, their intent clear. He felt their energy frenzied and erratic as they spread out, desperate to grab whatever they could. James bellowed, gripping the pitchfork tighter. He thrust it again, catching another looter in the ribs. The man yelped in pain, stumbling back into the fray. Each strike was instinctual, driven by adrenaline, memory, and the sheer need to protect his home. Yet even as he fought back, he could feel the tide turning against him. The looters were relentless. One swung a crowbar at James, narrowly missing his head. It clanged against the wall, the sound startling the animals inside. They whined and bleated, sensing the chaos and sensing James's rising fear. The pitchfork jabbed, swung, and parried, but fatigue was starting to settle in. He had faced storms and floods, but this was a different kind of battle. One of the looters hollered. Shadows shifted dangerously around him as they converged, buoyed by the collective energy of desperation. James could see it in their eyes, a wild, unchecked fear that made them dangerous and reckless. With every frantic breath, memories of working the land flooded back, every seed sown, every harvest reaped, and he felt a fierce protectiveness swell in his chest. This wasn't just a barn filled with hay, it was his life, his history, his family's legacy. He wouldn't let them take it. In that moment, something ignited within him, a fire fueled by defiance. He yelled, plunging the pitchfork again, catching another looter across the thigh. The man cried out, stumbling and losing his grip, but the others pressed in, a mass of wild energy too wild to reason with. James twisted and ducked as another attacker swung a makeshift weapon. Time slowed in that instant. He could see the man's eyes, wild and desperate, and for a fleeting second, he felt the raw desperation that drove him. But James pushed those thoughts away. This was his home, his sanctuary. The next looter lunged at him, a knife glinting in the dim light. With reflexes honed by years of hard work, James sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blade. He swung the pitchfork again, aiming low, catching the looter off guard. The pitchfork met flesh with a sickening thud. The man crumpled to the ground, and with each clash of metal against metal, James felt both fear and resolve hardening in his bones. "Get him," another looter shouted, pushing his way through the chaos. Outnumbered, James felt the weight of inevitability creeping in, but that wouldn't stop him. He pushed forward, refusing to yield. He jabbed at the swirling mass of bodies, feeling strength and conviction channeling through him. This was not merely about defending a barn, this was about protecting everything he held dear. Sweat dripped down his brow as he pressed onward, each thrust of the pitchfork echoing his desperate will. He ducked again, this time catching a looter under the chin, pushing the man back once more. He shouted, trying to summon every ounce of power he could muster. But then his muscles began to tire, the battle dragging on, and for the first time, doubt crept in. What if they overwhelmed him? What if he failed? He stole a glance at the animals, the frightened eyes of his cows, the terrified bleating of the sheep. They were counting on him. He couldn't let them down. In the confusion, another looter had made it behind him. James felt the presence before he saw the man, a rush of air as the figure raised something above him. Instinct kicked in as he whirled around just in time to meet the blow with the pitchfork, the metal biting into the wooden wall. The looter snarled, his eyes filled with fury, desperation flowing through him like poison. James barely had a moment to react, but he could feel the heat rising in the barn, the echoes of chaos thrumming in his ears. Summoning all his energy, James thrust the pitchfork forward, meeting the looter's chest, pushing him back. The man gasped, the fight leaving him as he stumbled away, but James felt the weight of exhaustion settling in like an anchor. He couldn't afford to slip, couldn't let them see his weakness. The battle was beginning to shift. One looter suddenly turned, then another, hesitating as if weighed down by the shock of their friend's defeat. The flames of complacency flickered in their eyes, but there was still a palpable tension crackling in the air. Someone yelled, their voice frantic. Gathering what remained of his strength, James couldn't let their desperation blind him. He pushed one looter into another, using their own momentum against them. As they fell, chaos erupted anew, the world spinning in a dance of self-preservation, mixed with fear and the instinct to survive. "Leave," he cried, gripping the pitchfork so tightly his knuckles turned white, but still they pressed in, anger fueling their approach, reckless and unyielding. One of them screamed, voice shaking with rage. Group began to surge forward again, seemingly fueled by a primal instinct to conquer at any cost. With a deep breath, James found strength in what lay ahead. He had defended from this chaos, but he also felt the pendulum swing against him. This was a battle of wills, but one he had no intention of losing. He pushed himself once more into offensive, striking low and moving fast, each swing of the pitchfork ringing true, connecting with soft flesh and metal, sending shocks of power through him. A voice called suddenly, coming from outside the barn. The commanding tone shattered the turmoil, freezing the looters in place. James's heart raced as he sensed a shift. That commanding voice could be his salvation or a heralding of worse chaos to come. The looters hesitated, glancing toward the door in fear. "Get out of here," boomed the voice again, more authoritative this time. The sheriff had arrived. Fear twisted through the looters as they exchanged frantic glances, clearly uncertain. They weren't ready to face the law, not after what they had done. In that moment, they seemed less like invaders and more like animals caught in a trap, eyes darting for an escape. As they turned to flee, James readied himself, arms trembling from the effort, heart hammering in his chest. "You think you can just walk away?" he shouted, pushing back any sense of reprieve. But just as the looters darted for the door, he glanced behind them and saw the sheriff breaking through, deputies following close at his heels. It was chaos, it was danger, and yet it was hope too. James felt the tides turning yet again. The sheriff commanded, voice booming with authority, and suddenly the air shifted. The looters froze, caught between fight and flight, uncertainty evident in the way they huddled together. James urged, fury surging through him. He could feel the power of his commitment now. "This is my home." But just then he noticed something flash in the corner of his eye, a figure lurking in the shadows outside the barn. Movement jerked his attention away from the looters, and an unsettling chill crept down his spine. Who was that? The sight distracted him for just a heartbeat, but in that moment confusion crept back into the chaos. The looters began to scatter like leaves in a whirlwind, trying to make a break for it. "Stop!" the sheriff shouted, scrambling to get control of the situation. With fear pulsing through him, James lunged forward, gripping the pitchfork tightly, but then a sudden loud crash erupted against the side of the barn, shaking the ground beneath them. The jarring impact brought everything to a standstill. The shadows were moving. In that fateful instant, the world spun away and James's mind raced. All eyes turned toward the source of the commotion, everyone on high alert for what came next, and then, darkness, thick and heavy, started closing in around them. The barn lights flickered, the sense of impending doom became nearly unbearable. He was moments away from understanding a stark reality. As he faced the intruders retreating through the door, that lurking figure in the shadows seemed poised to make the next move. The storm had arrived for James, and it was neither rain nor wind. It was chaos incarnate, and he was caught in the eye, ready to fight for everything he believed in. And just like that, everything was about to change.